The war between Brooke Logan and Steffi Forrester had always simmered beneath the surface of fashion, family, and legacy at Forrester Creations, but now it had erupted into a full-scale emotional and professional assault. No more subtle jabs. No more backhanded comments over boardroom tables. This was direct, sharp, personal. And it began the moment Steffi realized Ridge was wavering. After the collapse of his engagement to Taylor in Italy, Ridge had withdrawn emotionally. He had kept his distance, but his eyes lingered too long on Brooke during meetings, and his voice softened whenever she entered the room. Taylor had gone silent, licking her wounds in private. But Steffi? She cornered Brooke in Ridge's office, her tone cold and unwavering. "If you try to go after my father again," Steffi said, her voice like steel, "I will destroy everything you care about at this company. And that starts with Hope." Brooke was stunned. She tried to laugh it off, to shift the conversation toward professionalism, but Steffi wasn't playing that game. "This isn't just business," Steffi continued. "It's personal. You've torn this family apart for decades. I won't let you do it again." Not to my Brooke walked out of that room shaken. Not because she didn't expect it. Steffi had always been fiercely protective of Taylor, but because the threat was real. And effective. Brooke knew what Steffi was capable of. She had the authority, the influence, and the bloodline power to follow through. If Steffi wanted Hope gone from Forrester Creations, she could make it happen. And with Thomas back in her corner, and Ridge still emotionally compromised, there was Brooke went home that night and stared out the window for hours. Ridge hadn't said anything definitive yet. He hadn't come back to her. Not officially. But she could feel it building. A look. A pause. A shared glance across the Forrester showroom. It was all there. The unfinished story between them still alive. Still burning. And Brooke had never been the woman to let go of love, not when it felt this close. This inevitable. She told herself Hope would understand. That she was doing this for their family. That if Ridge came back, everything would be okay again. But deep down, she knew the cost. And she made the decision anyway. Days later, Steffi followed through. Hope received the news in an impersonal email. Her position as co-lead of Hope for the future was being reevaluated. Her budget was slashed. Her team reassigned. Thomas would be leading the next showcase. No explanation. No warning. Just silence. Hope confronted Steffi in front of the entire team, asking if this was personal. Steffi didn't deny it. "This is the cost," she said. "Tell your mother." Hope returned home in shock. She had spent years clawing her way out from under Brooke's shadow. Building her line. Building her name. And now it was all crumbling, not because of her designs, not because of her leadership, but because of Brooke. Again. Always Brooke. She went to Brooke's house that night, heart in pieces, barely holding herself together. Brooke tried to console her, told her it wasn't over, that they'd fix it. But Hope could see it in her mother's eyes, the guilt. The guilt and the hesitation. Brooke had known. She hadn't warned her. She'd let it happen. "You chose him," Hope whispered. Again. Brooke didn't deny it. Hope walked out. She didn't answer calls for the next 24 hours. She didn't go home. She didn't go to work. She just drove. Miles and miles up the coast. And when the night fell, so did her restraint. She stopped at a small roadside bar, ordered 2 drinks, then 3. The weight of everything, the betrayal, the humiliation, the loss became too heavy. When she finally got back into her car, she wasn't thinking clearly. The crash happened just after 2 a.m. No other cars were involved. Hope's vehicle skidded off a coastal bend, crashed through a barrier, and tumbled down a rocky incline. Miraculously, she survived. A bystander found her unconscious, bleeding, barely breathing. Emergency responders rushed her to the hospital. When Brooke received the call, she collapsed in the hallway. Doctors worked to stabilize her. A concussion, broken ribs, bruises. But the worst was the internal bleeding. The hours that followed were a blur of monitors, stitches, and fear. Ridge arrived later. He had heard the news. He saw Brooke in the waiting room, sobbing, covered in Hope's blood. She looked up at him, broken, and whispered, "This is my fault." And it was. Not just for failing to protect her daughter, but for choosing Ridge again over everything else. Steffi came too. She saw the carnage. She heard the story. The bar tab. The crash. The damage. And for the first time, her certainty cracked. Had she pushed too far? Had she drawn a line that shouldn't have been drawn? When Hope regained consciousness, she refused to see Brooke. She turned her face away from the door. She asked for Liam. For RJ. But not her mother. Brooke was left in the hallway, watching, waiting, unable to take back what she'd done. Ridge stood beside her, silent. He finally asked the question that had been building inside him since the beginning. Was I worth it? Brooke didn't answer. And that silence, too, was an answer. Back at Forrester, the fallout began to spread. Media caught wind of Hope's accident. The internal memo was leaked. Questions about Hope's departure from the brand began circulating online. Investors wanted explanations. Thomas tried to step up, but without Hope, the designs lacked her touch. Ivy began floating her own line. Donna and Katie demanded transparency. Eric was furious. And Steffi? Steffi started to feel the isolation creep in. Because Hope's absence wasn't just a business loss. It was a moral reckoning. And now everyone was asking the same question. Was this war ever worth the blood? Brooke had Ridge again, but at the cost of her daughter's trust, career, and safety. Steffi had protected her mother's pride, but fractured the company and the family in the process. And Hope? Hope had nearly lost her life because neither of them could let go of the past. The triangle had collapsed, but the wreckage it left behind had only just begun. When Ivy Forrester stepped back into Los Angeles, she didn't expect to become the center of a storm. Her return was understated, no red carpet, no press release. She said she was there for business, maybe for a new campaign, maybe to help recalibrate the international identity of Forrester Creations. But the truth was messier. Ivy had come back with something more potent than a new design or marketing pitch. She had a memory. A fragment of the past connected to Liam Spencer that had never been spoken aloud, one that would call into question everything about Liam's recent health, his treatment, and the timeline surrounding his neurological crisis. And that secret wasn't going to stay buried for long. Weeks earlier, Liam had suffered a head injury that left him disoriented, prone to memory gaps and severe emotional fluctuations. There were conflicting opinions about what had caused it. Some said it was a fall, others suspected something darker. He was undergoing treatment under the close supervision of Dr. John Finnegan, who had been tracking his progress and working to identify the full scope of Liam's neurological damage. But something didn't sit right with Ivy. When she visited Liam after his hospitalization, she noticed inconsistencies in what he remembered. Specific details, dates, places, conversations were off. Not just slightly. They were days apart from what she remembered. And Ivy remembered because she had been with Liam around that same time. In secret. It had been a brief, unplanned encounter months earlier in Milan. Liam had traveled there under the guise of attending a Forrester International board meeting. Ivy had been consulting on a campaign rebranding effort. They ran into each other at a cafe. What started as a casual conversation turned into a long dinner, then a walk through the city. Old sparks ignited. It didn't go further than a kiss, but it had been emotional, real, and loaded with unresolved feelings. Neither of them told anyone. But Ivy remembered the date clearly because it was the same weekend Liam had supposedly begun neurological treatments after his initial accident. The timeline didn't match. And if the timeline didn't match, it meant someone had lied about when the injury happened, where Liam had really been, and whether something more sinister had occurred. Ivy brought her concerns to Finn. At first, he dismissed them gently, respectfully, but Ivy pushed. She had photos, a restaurant receipt, a time-stamped boarding pass, all proof that Liam had been functional, articulate, and entirely lucid during a window when he was reportedly undergoing cognitive treatment. Finn paused. Ivy saw it in his face. The doubt. The possibility that something had been manipulated. That maybe Liam had been misdiagnosed. Or worse, someone had tampered with his medical file to cover something up. That was when Finn invited Ivy to help him cross-reference treatment logs and clinic documentation. It was risky, especially with the Forresters watching, but necessary. Ivy agreed. She didn't expect the collaboration to feel natural. She certainly didn't expect the old spark between them to flicker again. But it did. Years ago, Ivy and Finn had shared a brief connection, long before he ever met Steffi. It had been nothing more than a flirtation. But now, working late hours in close quarters, it began to feel like something more. Ivy was focused, driven, and fiercely intelligent. Finn was compassionate, grounded, and frustrated with how little control he had over the Forrester dynamics. They respected each other. And underneath that respect was chemistry. Unspoken at first, but undeniable. Steffi noticed. She walked in on them reviewing Liam's file one afternoon, and the air changed immediately. Ivy stood up, professional but calm. Finn tried to explain that they were pursuing a lead. Steffi didn't care. She accused Ivy of inserting herself where she didn't belong again. Of playing games with men she had no right to. Finn defended Ivy, saying she was helping clarify the medical record. That this was important. But Steffi saw through it. Or at least, she thought she did. To her, Ivy was reappearing in everyone's lives just in time to unsettle everything. Liam. Finn. Hope. And she wasn't wrong. Hope, too, began to feel threatened. Not just by Ivy's sudden closeness to Finn, but by her quiet re-entry into Liam's orbit. Hope and Liam had barely recovered from the last time Steffi came between them. Now, Ivy was lingering around both men she'd once loved, and both were responding. Liam became more emotionally dependent on Ivy, especially as doubts about his past few months began eating at him. Ivy was the only one who didn't question his instincts. The only one who believed him when he said he felt like someone was erasing parts of his memory. Hope tried to pull him back. But the more she clung, the more Liam distanced himself. What had started as a medical investigation was becoming something more tangled, more emotional. Steffi began pressuring Finn to end the inquiry. She claimed it was a distraction. That Ivy was manipulating the data. That she was trying to break up the family. But Finn resisted. His professional instincts told him something was wrong. That maybe Liam's original diagnosis had been corrupted, or worse, someone had used the injury to manipulate his behavior, to redirect his actions, to take advantage of his mental fragility. And if so, that person might still be close. Meanwhile, Ivy uncovered a redacted note buried deep in the clinic database, an anonymous entry added to Liam's chart weeks after his first recorded visit. It referenced an unauthorized sedative, one that could induce temporary memory loss. But the signature was encrypted. The access code linked back to a device registered in Los Angeles. Someone at the hospital, or someone with inside access, had tampered with the file. They were getting close. Too close. That's when the threat started. Ivy received an anonymous message, simple, direct, "Stop digging or someone you love will suffer the next fall." She didn't tell Finn. Not at first. But Liam noticed the tension. The silence. And when he asked her what was wrong, she finally broke down. She told him everything from Milan, to the inconsistencies, to the threats. Liam didn't panic. He got angry. Really angry. And for the first time in months, he felt like he had clarity. Someone had used his injury as a weapon. And he was done being their victim. Steffi confronted Ivy again, this time in front of the family. She demanded that Ivy withdraw from Liam's life, from Finn's investigation, from Forrester entirely. She accused her of using tragedy to worm her way into power. Ivy stood her ground. "I'm not the one hiding secrets," she said. "I'm the one trying to expose them." Hope watched all of this unfold in real time. Her fiancé clinging to Ivy, her family once again fractured, and the man she trusted most now defending another woman in ways she never expected. She confronted Liam, asked him what Ivy meant to him, whether he still loved her. He didn't answer. Not right away. Because the truth was, even Liam didn't know. The investigation continued. Finn traced the encrypted access to a local administrator connected to an outside research firm, one recently contracted by a Forrester subsidiary. The trail pointed not just to a medical cover-up, but to a corporate one. A plan to control Liam's decision-making in the lead-up to a pivotal board vote. A vote where he had sided with Steffi, despite prior conversations indicating he planned to support Hope. It hadn't been a coincidence. Someone had drugged him, redirected him, and possibly altered the course of the company's leadership. Now the stakes were bigger than ever. This wasn't about memory. This was about manipulation. And Ivy had just stepped into the eye of a new storm, one where truth, power, and love were all on the line. And someone was still watching.